What's up, Cannabis congregation? Thank you for joining us today, and happy Mother's Day to all the moms out there. Today, we're joined by Serra Frank from Moms for Marijuana International. So let's get right into it. How are you guys doing? Hey, Biggie, Tom, and Sarah.
Hi. Happy Mother's Day, Sarah. And you bring a message of Moms for Marijuana.
Yes, of course.
What's Moms for Marijuana?
Moms for Marijuana is an international grassroots network of parents and citizens around the world that are really focused on raising awareness and promoting education and creating discussion about cannabis and prohibition and the drug war in our local communities.
When you started in Washington, didn't you?
In Idaho.
Oh shit,
Idaho. That is a hard row to hoe. So can you give us like an update on the status of legalization out of Idaho? Hopefully. I think the man has already shut Serra down. That's how much Idaho doesn't like it.
Right? No, for real though.
Yeah, because
algorithm shit there.
Wait, I think she's back.
Did I leave? Sorry about that.
That's all right. We asked what the status of cannabis was in Idaho, and then the man shut you down. So could you?
He doesn't want you to know.
Of course, he doesn't want you to know. But why don't you tell us? And then if you do get shut down again, we'll be like, all right, well, they're clearly watching.
Idaho is the island of prohibition. It is as prohibition as it can get. They even pull over and arrest truck drivers driving legal hemp through Idaho and confiscate their inventory and their product and their trucks, and then charge them and throw them in jail and then put them on probation. So it's, and that's after the Farm Bill passed. So Idaho is completely utter prohibition. Our former governor, Butch Otter, is the only governor in the nation to veto the CBD for epileptic children bill when it hit his desk.
Well, his name is Butch, like, I don't really expect much from a Butch.
What a heartless asshole, though.
Oh yeah, what an ass. Like, this is going to help children? Not in this state. Yeah.
Well, he implemented a trial to test Epidiolex on 25 kids in Idaho. And he also received quite a bit of funding from GW Pharmaceuticals to implement these trials right as he vetoed the
sure. Because let's try
Here I am drinking a CBD sparkling water. I got this. Can I have this in Idaho?
It's a gray area. Ever since the Farm Bill passed, it's kind of popped up everywhere. So it's, I think, something they've kind of are slowly realizing they can't fight it anymore.
Really? Because like you go to Benny's Beverage Depot, this was $16 a six pack. It's got 20 milligrams of CBD and bubble water in it. And so like you can sell that for like $2.50 a can at like retail prices. So it's ridiculous. I mean, I couldn't find a six pack with alcohol in it that was that expensive. But CBD, you got to pay for that.
Yeah.
All right. Sarah, Idaho's like a police state though too, because I know the border is heavily watched on the Idaho side. How about with Oregon? How about the other bordering states?
Well, with Oregon, I know up north with Washington, there is an issue between the border towns, and it's because it's a money racket for sure. They're making quite a bit of money up there, and then down here, it's you don't see them every day like people fear, but they definitely do go out there and do what I call fishing for potheads. They pull people over and then they immediately call in a canine without anything, without even running the driver's license or anything, and then ask if they can search. And if you don't know your rights, you're stuck on the side of the highway for the next hour with them going through your entire car. And if you just came over the border,
little prophylactic, can you search? No, you may not.
Speaking of the law and searching, Sarah is quite the badass herself as far as she smoked on the steps of the Capitol. And
I didn't smoke. I have to correct you. They did not allow me to light it up. I felt like I was going to. Yeah. Well, they knew I was going to. I told them I was going to, and it was actually a planned protest. A smoke out.
Yeah.
And we'd had a couple other smokeouts for New Year's Day in Boise, and lit up on the side of the road, rolled joints on the trash can, and they didn't really do anything about it. But then we go to the Capitol, where it's the Idaho State Police instead of the Boise Police Department. And we also advertised very profusely and went on the news about it. So when we showed up, there was dozens of cop cars surrounding the Capitol. They had 38 cops there at final count.
So you could have robbed somebody at this time and be like, we're going to go smoke over there. Okay, I want you guys to knock over that liquor store, just rob everybody blind. And then they'll be like, they'll be concerned about the cannabis. That's going to, of course, I do not advocate crime. But at the same time, if you can run distractions like that, you're more likely to get away with it.
Right. Well, they were all focused on me. I know some people did light up, but when I went to go pull it out for 420 and light it up, I felt like I was going to be tackled. They came rushing at me, and my friend had to step in front of them and stop them. And I had to have a conversation in the middle of my, spiel I was doing for the news. And
were they trying to protect you? Is that why?
Oh,
they were trying to protect
the community.
She's gonna smoke the joints. She'll be insane for the rest of her life. Get her.
Well, I told them, fine, I won't light it. I'll just hand it to you. And I didn't want to be tackled, as a disabled individual. That's not always the best way to go. What got me, though, was a couple months later, a Second Amendment rights rally happened there, and people were walking in and out of the Capitol building strapped to the nine.
One of the things that I'm working on for the website, cannabisindustrylawyer.com, and then also the channel is a guns and cannabis episode. And there is one from a pro-gun YouTube channel that's out there. And then these guys seem a little duplicit in the sense that, they're out there trying to fight for your constitutional right to have a gun, but they really came down there. But then you can't have it because of marijuana. And they start defending the law about why, if you use marijuana at all, you can't have a gun. And I'm like, freedom? Like you guys forget freedom and rights and why you have a gun. And then the reason probably is because a lot of the guns, the gun aficionados, very often they're in law enforcement. And, marijuana is a boondoggle for law enforcement. It makes them so much money. And so they will. And then where is the NRA? Because how come I can't have a licensed firearm and buy a firearm in a licensed fashion because I have my medical card and because I am a, out there cannabis user? I try to use it legally in the venues where it is actually legal, but or I guess it'd be jurisdictions. Venues would be if we were suing the jurisdictions in which it is legal. However, why are my Second Amendment rights so easy just to sweep under the rug? And I think it's because a lot of the people that like their guns also like their law enforcement, and they like to pick
Yes, but Idaho is a very pro-gun state, and we demand our right to bear arms, and we've related a lot with the Second Amendment activists because it really does apply. The Second Amendment means you have the right to bear arms no matter what, even if you're a cannabis user, even if you use alcohol, even if you use prescriptions. And, you see them fighting a lot between those. And we try to focus again more, it's your Fourth Amendment right. It's your Second Amendment right to be able to possess that. It's your First Amendment right to be able to be open and honest about, I stand up for both my guns and my bong. It's, and we actually wrote it into, had it written into the latest petition we had in Idaho to ensure that we have our right to bear arms, because we found a lot of people were, kind of pushing away from it because they hear this, you don't have the right to use cannabis and have a gun at the same time. And that's absolutely not true when it comes to the Second Amendment. And it just needs to be fought more in court.
Well, they said that the intermediate scrutiny was enough. And so long as there was some reasonable restriction or some reasonable rationale that, if they are using this substance and then other crime can be going on, and then therefore they are allowed to abridge your Second Amendment right that easily. And then this is a pro-gun YouTube channel. arguing against your right to have a gun because you use cannabis. And then you mentioned that Idaho is a very pro-gun state, and they're one of the most anti-cannabis states. So it's just this cognitive dissonance that they have about like personal liberties, freedoms, the right to do what I want, and it's my body, my right, and I'll defend it with my guns. Unless what you're doing is smoking a joint, then they'll come at you to prevent you from hurting yourself with that joint. But how, like, can we audit the cops? Can we like look at their books and records to see how much money they get from cannabis being illegal and from arresting these people? And so that's another, I mean, that I'm not a criminal lawyer. And so like, I'm always really kind of approaching it from the deal making side. Why get the law involved when there's money and, you know, but
that's where they're getting their money at.
That's it. That's where they're getting their money. And so I have to kind of look at it that way. But I've been very disappointed with the NRA when it comes to marijuana. They're nowhere on it, and they don't care that you as a legal, quasi-legal. I mean, I am. You're in Idaho, so there is no such thing as medical use out there. But in Illinois, we have medical and adult use, and so I am not allowed to do a licensed gun transaction because I'm a felon according to the federal law, and I'm a danger because I might be trying to defend my home grow of a couple of cannabis plants for my medicine, which, you know, it just boggles the mind that they don't go to bat for this, but they'll go to bat.
It probably really ties in with, you know, the drug war and the ability to stack on multiple charges, especially, and to, you know, increase a charge when there's a gun involved. They used to use that a lot, and they, you know, be able to stack all these things on there and then be able to mediate some sort of plea bargain to get their conviction.
So what type of issues does Moms for Marijuana advocate?
Well, like I said, we're all about education, awareness, and discussion. We feel that with these three things, education, people learning the true facts about cannabis, teaching our children the true facts about cannabis. And then with awareness, people, you know, becoming more aware about how it helps people, how it can help our industry and our society and our health and our future, and the future of our children. And then we start discussions, like I go try to smoke a joint on the Capitol steps because it got everybody talking. You know, I didn't do it because I wanted to go to jail, you know, or fight them in court, but because of it, it got people talking. It was on the news. People were talking about it at home. People were talking about it in the courthouse. There were, you know, people I didn't even know coming into the courtroom during my hearing, you know, just to watch what was happening, because it created that discussion. And then we also focus on how, you know, cannabis prohibition is a plague on our future generations and an insult to our ancestors. You know, we've used this plant for thousands of years for everything. And, you know, I'm a DARE child. I'm of the DARE generation. You know, I grew up with Just Say No and DARE, and was taught that weed is the most evil thing in the entire world, just like everybody else since 1937. And it's just, you know, gone through cycles, and it's been passed from generation to generation to generation. So we really advocate ending that cycle of lies. And focusing on the true facts of what cannabis can do for us. And then because of my own experiences with my daughter and learning, you know, about the corruption in child protective services and foster care, there's this whole other side to cannabis, and people losing their families and having them ripped apart, not just because they're going to jail or, you know, because parents are unable to use the cannabis for their kids or for their family, but also because the state is coming in and stealing our children. Yeah. And because of this, I learned a lot. And then we started just getting more and more and more stories. And what we're finding is that, you know, they've been using cannabis since the 1970s to remove children from their parents. And even in legal states, as the law is changing, the department policy is not catching up, and they are not aligned, and they will remove children and try to put parents into rehab, even though it's legal in that state.
The CPS issues like one of the ones that Sarah that I've known, she's definitely been fighting and helping with along with the Lilly Foundation. She was part of that beginnings, but before that, she was even doing marches and with the activism. Before even the CPS issue, it was the health issue. Because Sarah, I saw the video with the Kings of Pop production. And that was Micah Malta. He was an East Coast activist.
Oh my goodness!
Yeah, see, nobody knows.
That was my first video. Oh my goodness!
But still, this is history, right?
Oh,
I mean, you've been doing it for such a long time. You're not a come around lately type person, and so yeah, go for it.
He was one of the first people I met as I phased out of MySpace into Facebook and went from being an armchair activist to being, taking to the streets. We like to do chalk walks, things like that. And I did an interview with Adam Eisenberg up in Moscow, Idaho. They've had a hemp fest there for a while, and it was the local public radio. And he connected me to the King of Pop.
Can you tell people more about the chalk walks too? Because I think that was a great thing that you guys are doing. Because every time there was a CPS issue or somebody else being locked up, you guys were outside being the pest that you should be.
Well, it began with, I don't know if anybody remembers, the Occupy movement of 2012. I learned about or 2010 to 2012, I learned about these activists who had taken to the sidewalks with chalk to get their message across. And they had been arrested, they'd spent time in jail, and they fought it. And the Supreme Court upheld that it's their First Amendment right to chalk on the sidewalk because it's not graffiti. And if you're going to arrest people for chalking on the sidewalks, you have to go arrest all the 6-year-olds that are drawing on the sidewalk as well. And the Supreme Court said, no, this is First Amendment freedom of speech, freedom of the press. Even if it's on this ground, it doesn't violate anything. So we kind of took that and ran with it with the Moms for Marijuana chalk walks, where we would just get together like once a month with all our kids, and different groups around the country, and just take a walk in the park on a green belt and just chalk cannabis facts, spread that awareness and raise that education, plant those seeds for people to, follow up on. And then when the Fight for Lilly happened, it kind of went on into the CPS activism as well. And those two just mesh so much at times.
Yeah. So Fight for Lilly, for those who don't know, Lilly was a daughter of Billy Fisher, right? Who he lost custody because cannabis use, right? He was a medical patient.
He never had custody. His ex-wife lost custody. And then when we tried to go up and get her from Spokane CPS, they told him he couldn't have her until he did 30 days of inpatient rehab and 2 years of aftercare for his medical marijuana use. And along with, parenting classes and drug testing. And they have a basic 4. They have the parenting, they have chemical dependency, they have domestic violence, and they have counseling, just basic mental health.
Who pays for all that?
You do.
Yeah.
Yeah, the taxpayer does. It comes out of Title IV Social Security funding. And so, this was Spokane in 2013, right after Washington had just legalized. And being the activist that I had been for, half a decade before that, I took it to Seattle Hemp Fest and started meeting people like Miggy and, just people who pushed us in the right direction. And we fought back and learned how to fight back and got her home. And then that just evolved into everything else I know about CPS these days.
That's really important to do that, because so many parents, they don't have the healthiest relationship with one another, and they might want to bicker and fight in courts. They call them family cases, and they get very, very mean. And some people try to screw over the other people, and they'll call Child Protective Services.
Yes.
And they'll be like, I know you smoke weed, test them. And then they're using it to get influence over their own children, and they shouldn't have that ability. I mean,
it's weaponized.
They're weaponizing it. Yeah.
They weaponize them. And then at the same time, here is a corrupt family court, child custody court, looking at these parents going, oh, there's conflict in this household. Neither of these parents are fit. We're going to come in and steal your children. We've watched that several times. After a different case, we'll leave the courtroom and the judge is all, you need to call CPS, and has the clerk call.
Yeah, we cut that. I mean, that was something in our Illinois cannabis law where they put that into it because that was a thing, and I'd seen that firsthand as well. But just that they have that ability to do it because it's cannabis, and then they don't have the ability to be like, no, test them for nicotine. They're smoking in front of my child. Send them to rehab. Take
We actually asked the social workers in Spokane, well, what about, Billy's nicotine addiction? What about his Pepsi addiction? Why don't they care about those things? And they're like, well, those are legal. And I'm like, but cannabis is legal too. The policy and the state law just don't mesh until somebody trains them differently.
Well, plus CPS is kind of like an organization where, we have conspiracy theories about why marijuana and we're in a state of disarray for what it is. But when you're a CPS individual, it's a low hanging fruit. Okay, let me go bust these people. Now I got a kid in custody and I can farm this kid out to an adopted agency or some shit. It's just it's like a farm, and cannabis is one of the reasons.
Cannabis is one of millions of reasons that they use. I've heard everything from there were crayons on the floor, so that's a choking hazard, to
we're gonna need to audit this.
Yeah.
I want to see who's paying their guys' bills, because very often when there's BS regulation and enforcement that makes no sense, usually what happens is if you follow the money, they're paying off the government, or there's a boondoggle out there and somebody's profiting off of this bad policy outcome. And it sounds
the states are.
Yeah. So the states, right. So then they take the kids, they put the kids over there, and then somebody's getting paid to do that. And then they make them go over to rehab.
Yes.
And rehab people probably have a contract with the state and they're getting paid over there. And then of course the cops, they're getting paid. And then the prisons, hopefully they're not privatized. Do you guys have privatized prisons in Washington State?
We're in Idaho.
Oh.
We do in Idaho. I don't know about Washington, and that may have been a part of it. But you're absolutely right. Everybody is getting paid when it comes to CPS.
But
social workers, the providers, the adoptive parents, the foster parents, the people driving them back and forth, the visitation centers, the clerks at the court, the bailiff at the court, the security guards at the CPS office, the supervisors, the regional directors. It goes up and up and up. The privatized part of it I found with Child Protective Services is I learned recently in the show on Netflix, The Trials of Gabriel Fernandez, which is a devastating show, and it really goes into another side of how CPS is broken, about children needing help who don't get the help they need. And it all boils down to a certain company not allowing social workers to have overtime, so they shut them down, or not allowing them to go. It becomes the budget being the bottom line and not the best interest of the children. And that show, The Trial of Gabriel Fernandez, points out that it's a company called Maximus, which is a for-profit company that actually has traded stocks and everything.
Yeah, that's wrong. I mean, and then there's certain things that are public goods, and there's also certain things that you can't put a profit margin into because while they are a necessary service that the state should provide, they are not a necessary business that we should allow to grow. So like when you have privatized prisons in Idaho or anywhere, and they have heads and they want them to be put on beds, so they aren't going to be able to make enough money unless they have enough people that are in there so they can get the money from the federal or the state government. And that type of profit margin creates a perverse incentive. And that perverse incentive is we need crime to happen, or we need criminals to happen so we can maximize our profits, or we need children being taken out of their homes so that we can actually afford our budgets. And those types of policies create these types of problems. And and the thing is, though, because when it's weed or when it's kids from broken homes, I think people are just so callous because they're like, nah, they're potheads. They're just prejudiced.
Yeah. And they don't care. And it's exactly that. It's, the profit margin. And every year they need more and more kids to create more and more profit, the same as they would with prisoners. So they need to remove them. And the difference between criminal and family law, the custody issue, the juvenile law, with these child welfare courts, is that in criminal law, you need a warrant to arrest somebody, and you need evidence and facts and who, what, when, where this happened, this crime was violated, this crime was committed, this law was violated. But when it comes down to CPS and removing children from their homes, they just need hearsay. Somebody just needs to call up CPS and say, this is happening. And then that sends in an investigator. And even if there's not enough evidence, we find that social workers are so poorly trained, or some of them even just straight out lie to get children in those beds, because they receive quarterly bonuses, they receive adoption bonuses. So they're rewarded by the state for the more and more children that they take and put in these beds. So using cannabis, especially with these legal states where everybody is using cannabis now, they, have a easy way to make profit where they're not having to deal with angry people, and they're not having to deal with drunk people and crackheads and people like that. And when you look at the budget, according to the state budgets, they receive more money when a child is not in their home. They receive more money per foster bed that they fill through foster care stipends. And then they receive an adoption bonus for every adoption out of foster care. And then they receive adoption stipends every single month for these children. And it all goes to balance the budget. They spend a couple $100,000, or you're in the high 100,000s for things like food stamps in Idaho. But then they get millions for foster care and adoption stipends. So it's, if you were to take that away from the state wouldn't have any money to balance its budget and then get more to claim for next year.
They could legalize it. Yeah, tax that.
Yes, that is one of my arguments as well, for sure.
But that funding you're talking about is another part of how this imbalance of justice happens, right? Like funding for research for cannabis, how that doesn't happen because they have to look for bad things, and funding for departments of justice to cage kids. I mean, it's all part of the contribution to how fucked up our system is. But Sarah, do you think in Idaho it's getting better? Because there's people like you and Russ who are from Idaho that are actually, who stand for common sense or fighting for this, positions, because you, back in the day too, you helped like Lindsay Reinhardt, like when her kids were taken away, like because of cannabis. So, I mean,
and that actually happened right at the same time as the Fight for Lily started. We just didn't go public about it for a couple months. So I didn't have much knowledge, about law or about CPS or how to fight. But I did have knowledge about cannabis, and there was no way, like with Lindsay's case, they wanted to charge her with injury to a child. And I've seen this happen. They're charging parents who use cannabis or give cannabis to their kids with injury to a child when cannabis can't injure anybody ever. We know this. Yeah. We as activists, we who smoke it, we who have done our research and have education about cannabis know that nobody's ever died ever, right? Or really been injured.
Yeah, but they have these BS claims, and they've been unsubstantiated. But then they have these BS claims that cannabis, for some reason, changes your brain, which it's really, really, that's one of those studies that's going to get funding, though. Like, you're only going to get approved for studies. Be like, I would like to charge to figure out how this problem happens. That
but they don't want you to do that because they have a patent on it. That's 6630507. Of course, it changes your brain.
It expired.
It's a neuroprotectant.
Yeah.
Yes,
it expired this year. And then the reason why they don't want more science is because that science was bad and it was suspect and from the 1970s. And then they did another study in the 1990s and it didn't show it. And then they did another one where not just the monkeys using a functional equivalent of a joint, they were just injecting vast quantities of THC into rats, still no change to the brain, but it perpetuates. And then people you can ask anybody and they will, without batting an eye, say well, it's bad for children. It changes their brains. Like they've heard it from God.
Because they're programmed, we've all been programmed. I used to be programmed. I used to believe it killed brain cells and caused cancer.
Well, you're a dare kid.
Because I'm a dare kid. Right. And then when I first started researching it, it saved my life. And then I got curious. I'm like, wait a minute, this helped me. It got me off of opiates and got me out of my bed and moving again and able to be a mom. And so I started doing my research, and the first thing I learned was not only does it not kill brain cells, it kills cancerous brain cells. Through the Seth Foundation in California and through Dr. Guzman in Madrid, Spain, I'm finding it kills cancer. And it's not everything I was taught. Those were the first things I learned, and I got goosebumps immediately. And I was like, well, why don't people know this? And then so that's why I made the MySpace page and started just spreading that information. And my favorite thing about cannabis is that it's been 15 years of me researching this, and I still learn new stuff every day. This is the most amazing plant I have ever encountered, and we still have zero understanding of it compared to the potential that it has for us as humans and for our planet and for our children.
Along those lines of that program that you're talking about, let's talk about shitty programming. I mean, how much sense does it make that your governor is going to approve an Epidiolex fucking, it's okay to have a manufactured extraction from this plant, but you just can't have the actual plant. And we're not trying to isolate any of these cannabinoids for taking out toxin effects. We're just isolating cannabinoids for whatever reasons. That's all they're doing. It's not for, we're trying to get the bad stuff out. We're just trying to pick and choose what we want. They're not saying bad stuff, period. Overall, it's just a fucking plant, like you're saying.
It's just money. And I'm totally a whole plant person because they all work together. The science behind it shows they all work together. We need that entourage effect. But when you look at Idaho, it's just money. It's their prisons, it's their police force. It's up in, I just got done with a case up in Lewiston where they were offering people $250 fine for a marijuana possession ticket with 0 jail time, 0 community service, 0 probation. Whereas down south, they have those things, the probation, what they called sealed, which is the sheriff's labor duty, the people on the side of the highway picking stuff up. And it's all of these things are money. They're part of their money making machine, and they're milking this cash cow until it dies. And that's all I see happening. They're not going to let go of it until it is completely 100% dead. They always argued, 10 years ago that, we can't legalize medical marijuana because it's not federally legal, right? But then the Farm Bill passes, industrial hemp is legal, and they still can't legalize industrial hemp. So it's not about what the feds want. And then half the time our governor's fighting with the feds on gun laws, so it's about money. It's all about their donations, and that $10,000 donation they got from GW Pharmaceutical, that's the top amount you can receive as a candidate. And Butch Otter got his share of that.
Oh, for sure. On this mom's day. Okay.
Then he retired. So it's,
It's just kind of convenient, right? You kind of run away with the money, the little bag of cash, you fuck over as many people as you can, and you're just like,
I served my community.
We can speculate all we want, but the numbers show the public finance campaigns and, for their campaigns, and that donation was there, and that trial happened, and he vetoed that bill. There are a lot of children in Idaho depending on that bill. So it pissed a lot of people off, which is what pushes us forward as well. The more our government fights us, the more the people are getting pissed off and saying, well, why isn't this done already? We already know the facts. We see the taxes. We see what it does for children.
What's the population of Idaho?
I just looked this up the other day too. I'm sorry. It's pretty big. It's over 1 million. I would say upper.
Closer to 2?
Well, more than that. I believe it's more than that.
A lot of the West Coast states, they have this personal freedom that's more popular in the West. Miggy's always going on about his personal freedoms, and and I tell him, no, over here in the Midwest we have moral indignation and righteousness, and how all those types of things. What is the culture in Idaho? Because you're painting it as being fairly conservative. So, like, they love their gun.
Idaho is known as one of the most conservative states, but at the same time, I think we're kind of in between the two of you. The major freedoms are on the West Coast for sure. I call where I live 20 miles over the border temporarily into Oregon because Idaho laws are bad for my health, but I also want to be able to go home. So I'm an hour and a half from my home and my family, but I'm in a state where it's legal. And but I call it Western Idaho because the same mentality is happening over here. And we actually had a CPS case here where it was a legal medical grow, and they took a 2-year-old out of the house because they believed the one pot leaf on the floor would kill her.
Oh,
this was the social worker's statement in court. And it's
the pot leaf on the floor. What, did the pot leaf have a gun, and was the pot leaf actually sentient and able to pull the trigger? Yeah. But
guns are everything in this area, for ranchers and for the farmers and, Idahoans. It is, I've seen it several different times viewed as marijuana is viewed as more dangerous than the guns. Like with me almost getting tackled on the Capitol steps and then having a Second Amendment rally, or the day that Lindsay Reinhardt's kids were taken, that same day, a child, in Middleton, Idaho, I believe, found a loaded gun under the seat of his parents' car and shot his baby brother. And thank God that child is okay, but they didn't go take the children away because it was an accident, but they took Lindsay's kids away because her child supposedly got a hold of cannabis.
It's still pick and choose.
Yeah. And
guns are more dangerous than weed. Like,
yes,
that we have to have this conversation shows that Idaho is what was colloquially known as a pejorative, and now we just kind of say special. And so, like, Idaho is very special, it sounds like. But be careful with how you phrase that, because they're also armed to the teeth. So you have to be careful when you're telling a state you're stupid but armed, and so Idaho and Mike Crapo in the Senate, perfect name from a guy from Idaho, because his ideas are going to be crap, but also rhyme with the name of the state, Crapo, and he is the guy that the Safe Banking Act flew through the House of Congress, or the House of Representatives in Congress, and then they get to the Senate. And it was just butchered by Mike Crapo's banking committee. They wanted to put a 2% threshold for THC.
Yeah, see, our representatives are just making us famous for all the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
Our governor, governor, all of them. Crapo, the best thing Crapo did for us.
I like to pronounce it Crapo, but still.
Crapo.
That's the American pronunciation.
Mike Crapo. The best thing he did for us.
If I could correct the pronunciation of your name, it's crap. Crapo. It's right.
Well, the best thing he did for us was do that because it caught everybody's attention. Now everybody's mad at Idaho, and the people in Idaho are seeing this. And it's not the people of Idaho who don't want cannabis. It's the politicians, and they're the ones who are in control. And if we could just get it on the ballot, it'll pass. I believe full legalization would pass.
Oh.
I've talked to so many people. I've talked to thousands of people over the years, and there has been a very obvious change. I used to go up and say, "Hey, what do you think about cannabis?" And they'd look at me and go, "What's that?" And then you'd say the word marijuana and they'd run away practically. And now it's nurses going, "Oh, wish we could give this to our patients." And people are like, "Oh, my wife's a doctor, and my husband's a police officer, and we definitely need this." And so the stigma has changed. Everybody knows what cannabis is. Everybody wants CBD, but they're also finding out that CBD isn't giving them the miraculous effects that they were promised because it's just CBD. So it's, the people want it. If we could get it on the ballot, it would happen in a heartbeat. But all these things prevent us from getting on the ballot. Like they made some restriction around the time that Lindsay Reinhardt was helping with Compassionate Idaho, and that petition, they made it so that we now have to get 6% of the voting population in 18 out of 35 legislative districts around the state, as well as 6% of the entire state. Yeah, and last year they were also trying to restrict the petition laws even more, giving us shortened time and more requirements. And
we saw this exact same thing happen in Arkansas. We had a guest on from Arkansas trying to get cannabis on the ballot there, and for some reason these ballot laws have been around for a while, But then somebody tries to get cannabis on it, and suddenly they're like, oh no, we need to raise the bar on all of our requirements. And then they raise the bar on all the requirements. So that being the case, seeing how Idaho appears to be doing that, what about like drug-free Idaho? Are they going to just crap their pants if this gets on the ballot and everybody's going to throw everything against the vote, and they're going to go full lies like the Nixon administration did?
We know it's coming, and we just hold on to the fact that cannabis sells itself. You know, the truth about cannabis is out there. You just have to research it, and most people are aware of it, and most people don't care. You know, and they see how it helps people, and they want that, especially for their friends and family and their own children. And it's, you know, it's just going to take time. We know they're going to come out with all sorts of things. They already came right after that video came out. They started putting up billboards across the state and all these different things. And when the movie came out, the director of Drug Free Idaho made me call him and promise not to light up a joint in the movie theater.
What?
He was worried. And then we had an 1.5 hour long conversation where I tried to educate him, and he kept asking me, well, if you were presented with the real information and it contradicted what you believe, what you're thinking, would you change your mind? And I'm like, dude, I already did. I'm a dare child.
Yeah, but everybody else's answer is no. 60% of people won't. And it's like, hey, I really don't like how your facts are getting in the way of my beliefs.
Right.
You know.
That's like you said, dissonance. Yeah.
And like you said, Sarah, the people of Idaho are not all living in 1930. Just the politicians. You know, I've been to Boise. It's a college town. It's badass. I've been to even the small towns like Pocatello and Idaho Falls. Like one of those small towns had the Museum of Bodies come through, which, you know, that was pretty like modern. I was like, what the fuck? Like this.
Yeah, it's a beautiful state, and I used to run away from it. I've lived in Arizona and Oregon and Washington, all for the cannabis laws, you know, and the access that I had because I need it for my health. And then I realized that the one thing I don't like about Idaho, well, not the one thing, but the one thing that is keeping me from living there, I can change, you know. So I focus on Idaho, and I focus on changing that for me and for my children so I can move home. I'd like to go home. You know, I'm kind of in exile. But, you know, the one thing that I have a problem with is the one contributing to factor for all the things I have a problem with Idaho, and it's an outdated administration, you know, an outdated Congress, and it's starting to change. We're getting quite a few people, and, you know, as they see that it's not the end of the world when legalization happens, more and more people step out, and once we get it on the ballot, it'll happen.
I mean, Idaho's a great place to smoke. I've done it, just not legally.
Nobody can do it legally.
A whole bunch of old white men in the House of Legislature in Idaho, or what?
That's about. We're just waiting for things to change. We know it's a good old boy mentality for sure, and that's when you get people like Crapo and Otter and all those people who've been there for the last 10 years.
I can't wait till I'm never going to call Senator Crapo by his real name. And I hope I meet him. I'll be nice. I mean, I'm not going to like take him out back and try to kick his ass or nothing, but I'd be tempted. And then, why not? And then, but then I'd call him Crapo. And I'd
right, but that you know. Yeah. You know who our senator is, and you have this issue with him, and you don't even live in Idaho. That kind of shows the rest of the world, or shows Idaho what the rest of the country is thinking about us.
No, but it's my industry, and so like he's standing in the way of my industry growing, and then cannabis helping more people, and all my clients not getting ripped off because they can't get bank accounts as easily, and so then they're able to, if they can find a bank, that bank has them by the the cojones, and they can charge as much as they want because you really need a bank account when you're dealing with the kind of cash that a dispensary or a grow puts out. You don't want the risk of having to just have $1 million. Like, I don't want $1 million in my house. I don't, not in cash. I'd much rather be in a bank ledger.
Well, he's also
it needs to be brought into the 21st century.
Yeah.
You know, it's been outdated, or it's been prohibited and demonized for almost 100 years. And we know that that's not true. The lies have unraveled. They're, you know, activists for the last 40 years, you know, Jack Hare and everybody who's been just stomping the ground and making sure that this information is out there for us to carry on the conversation and then have our children carry on that conversation. It's the future. We need to choose which side of history we're going to be on, because everything's changing, and it is definitely the future of our world.
I think crap was also stopping the progression of American justice. You know, if we can just show like, hey, there's $1 billion trillion in the bank accounts of these fuckers, you know, in the multi-legal states, you know, then maybe people consider, you know, that people like Lance could be free, and then people like Tracy don't have to be sonless for Mother's Day, you know. And you know,
Yes.
Sarah, you've been doing the whole family for the kids type shit. I mean, you did the Cash Hyde when he was here, you know, R.I.P. That guy. He was one of the first kids, like pre-Charlotte's Web, you know, that it helped make his life better. It's just some diseases you just can't stop, period. I mean, we just try and help make a better life, get through this situation that we're in. You know, weeds helped me through my quarantine. You know, plus it's helping through my Mondays. Plus
it's essential. that is validation for every activist in the entire world that cannabis has been declared essential, but yet in Idaho we can't even have it.
So if like your senator or douche could just get his head out of his ass, then we could probably, you know, progress the world. But you were so kind, because even with the cops that arrest you, you're just like, look, I don't want to get tackled, but we're friends still. Like,
well, we got to use our manners. It's a civilized society, and they're just doing their job. And my job is to change the law so that they can do their job differently.
It's a thug society. They just take.
I just, you know, I just wish there was a higher bar for a lot of police enforcement. You know, a lot of these people think that they're the law. That, you know, how about just the will of the people?
A lot of it also has to do with training. I noticed that with my Lewiston court case, that they immediately call in a canine. And doing the research, and the Idaho Supreme Court has already declared you can't go outside the scope of a traffic stop without probable cause, and to just call in a canine immediately. With me, it was that I was shaking, and then I got pulled over like a week after that got all settled, and the guy immediately called in that canine. And it's like, why are they calling in a canine without even running a driver's license, without even, you know, any smell or any probable cause whatsoever? And it's because it's how they're trained. And, you know, the same thing goes for social workers. It's how they're trained, and every department is different. Every supervisor is different, and some of them are ignorant, and some of them are straight up malicious. Same with cops, and
same with politicians.
You know, same with politicians
and industry types that have interests.
And everybody. It's like I teach my kids, you know, being a cop, being a judge, being a social worker, being a cashier at McDonald's. These are jobs, and it's a personal decision how you interact with the people that you have to interact with. Are you going to treat them correctly and be a good person and make the right decision? Or are you going to be malicious and use your power to hurt somebody? And, you know, it's any job you have.
Definitely 90% of the times I've dealt with cops, I've always been honest and straightforward. But there's that 10% that have fucked with me, you know, because of smell. Whereas, you know, the other 90 are like, hey, you're honest with me, thank you. But, you know, that's why I like Seattle Hemp Fest, because you see how police and people can get along, where it's like, hey, we're just over here smoking a joint or whatever, and you're standing there watching me not do shit.
Right. Yeah, and that's, you know, one of the other things with Idaho and where the drug war really does play into it is I have never dealt with police the way I have in Idaho. I've dealt with police all over the country, you know, especially when it comes to CPS stuff, because social workers like to call the cops when you're chalking up their sidewalks. But, you know, they respect the First Amendment. I have never had anybody not respect my constitutional rights the way the Idaho cops do. And not just the ISP, but different counties, different police. And it's all about training, you know, and it's, you don't, you know, you working with them and talking with them and being honest with them often doesn't get you anywhere anyway. So you immediately want to shut up and you immediately want to invoke your rights, and it's out of fear. And a lot of people, you know, they have PTSD over interaction with police, and Even the Supreme Court acknowledged that in some of their rulings, that people are nervous when dealing with police, and you shouldn't be. You shouldn't have to be. And it comes from this fear of authority and this fear of, especially in Idaho with weed, that I'm doing something that's going to end up putting me in jail and getting my kids taken away and losing my job and losing my house and losing my car. Yeah. And it's just a plant that is very, very, very beneficial. As a mom, I definitely agree that, there can be dangers, getting too high. I've taken some of those medibles. I know how it can be. I've been taking a big dab before. There definitely needs to be restrictions to help children who don't have experience and knowledge, the same way with alcohol. But throwing people in jail for it is just not okay anymore. So we are way beyond that now. And it needs to stop, especially for people like Lance, who are, it's people who are in there there are people who are making money off of this industry, and then there are people who have lost their lives to this industry and their children in their homes. We need to find some balance and even it out here.
That's right. Social equity.
Yep. We forgot to mention too, Sarah, that you are the Boise Hemp Fest, right?
Yes, I'm the event coordinator for Boise Hemp Fest.
So thank you so much for joining us today. Where can we find and follow Moms for Marijuana?
It's momsformarijuana.org, all words spelled out.
Awesome.
And on Facebook, of course.
Oh, yeah. We'll throw that in the description. Thanks for watching, everybody. Make sure you like and subscribe to keep up with all cannabis legalization news. We'll see you on Wednesday.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day.